Professor Emeritus Kamal Hassan. We have listened to him for the past 3 lectures. Last week we listened to this beautiful munajat by our Buya Hamka. We talked about tasawuf modern, the new urban tasawuf, which is alhamdulillah, we are part of it. We don't have to go to suluk, to go to the remote places or to the mountain to become a Sufi. We can be in our house, in our offices, whenever we are, but we are still submit, or we are still practicing the basic discipline, being a good Muslim, inshallah. So this week, Prof will continue with the 4th lecture. So without further ado, we invite our dear respected professor to continue with us. Okay, Prof.
Okay, thank you very much, Brother Shahran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And very good evening to all viewers in this part of the world, in Southeast Asia, Indonesia. This is evening, but in other places, you may be in the morning or at daytime. Anyway, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. O Allah, you are the exalted. We do not have any knowledge except that which you have taught us. Indeed, you are the all-knowing, the all-wise, the all-knowing. And there is no power or strength except with you. O Allah, you are the exalted, the Almighty. We express our gratitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for it is only by His grace and by His mercy that I'm able to be with you tonight, and that we're able to continue this series on exposition on the life and thought of Buya Hamka. And I'd like to thank, of course, Brother Shahran and IIIT of East Asia, including Dr. Fawzan, I can see him there, for hosting this series of lectures. Brothers and sisters, in this 4th lecture, I will be focusing on I would say the second most important book after Tasawwuf Modern, and that is Falsafah Hidup. Falsafah Hidup, or in English, Philosophy of Life, was actually written before the Second World War, 1940. After he finished Tasawwuf Modern, I think he worked on Falsafah Hidup. And then it was continued for some time. And then Indonesia gained independence or declared independence in 1945. And so some of the post-independence speeches and writings have also been included in this book. Let me show you the book. This is the book, yeah, Falsafah Hidup. It's about 500 pages. And it's written with this philosophical orientation or approach. And Buya is one of those few scholars who actually became an admirer philosophy. And he learned all this from the Arabic translations from either English or French or from Arabic itself. So this is, as I said, a very important work in the Malay world, because in 1940, there was no such book on falsafah hidup, the philosophy of life. Whereas we know that philosophy of life is very important. It is part of the worldview that we all have about existence, about the meaning of man, and how did life start, and where are we heading? What is the purpose of life? And these are all questions which have to do with worldview. But in this book, Buya focuses on the philosophy of life, written from, as I said, a philosophical perspective. But at the end of it, he begins with, say, philosophical discussion, and then he takes you gradually through his rational arguments, using the Quranic sources to support his arguments, and then also some Sufi perspectives also brought in, so that at the end of the book, he will give you the conclusion, which is very Islamic. So Buya doesn't start with something Islamic and then end with something quite liberal. He starts with an open approach, and then gradually he takes you through the history of ideas, Western and Eastern, and then he would go to the Quran, to the Prophet ﷺ, and then through the thoughts of some Muslim thinkers and also Sufis. And then he will give you at the end the conclusion. So this in this book, let me see. Okay, you remember that in the last lecture, in lecture number 3, I discussed also the content of Tasawwuf Modern. In fact, the theme throughout Tasawwuf Modern was just one theme, and that is bahagia or happiness. What is happiness? How do philosophers, Western and Eastern, look at happiness? And then how do you get happiness according to different schools of thought? And then he would also look at the Sufi perspective on happiness. And then he would come to the end that happiness is actually not actually, the ultimate happiness is in the hereafter, not in this world. Anyway, in this book, in this Falsafah Hidup, he does not have one single theme like bahagia. In fact, he would discuss different, I would say, components of the philosophy of life, made up of moral, spiritual values or principles. So, for instance, he divides the book into 9 chapters, and the first one is, in general, he discusses the importance of reason in human life. So they might say that is rationality. Rationality as part of of a philosophy of life. And then in the second chapter, he discusses the place of rationality and knowledge in Islam. And then in the third chapter, he discusses the subject of let's say keutamaan, that is to say what is regarded as a priority in life. Okay, and then number 4 is adab kesopanan. It's about ethics and good character. So that is a fourth, you might say, the fourth component of the philosophy of life from an Islamic perspective. Because what Buya does is that he is actually explaining his own philosophy of life, but using a philosophical method, as though it is not his actually, but you know, it is an abstraction of ideas coming from the philosophers and so on. But in actual fact, those components, 2, 3, 4, adab kesopanan, and then number 5, kesederhanaan, that is i'tidal in Arabic, and then number 6, the value of courage, shaja'ah, and then number 7, the value of keadilan or adalah, and then number 8 and number 9, the value of ukhuwah, and in other words, all these 8 you might say components of or constituents of philosophy of life are actually components of his own philosophy, but they are actually based on the teachings of Islam. All right, so now let me just put the book down and I will go to my notes. In this book, Hamka decides to expound the concept of philosophy of life. Remember, of course, today we are familiar with philosophy or philosophies of life, but in the 40s, you don't hear people talking about philosophy of life from a philosophical perspective. But Buya did that, just as you would never dream an alim would write a novel, and he came out with a novel, Tenggelamnya Kapal Van der Wijk and Di Bawah Lindungan Ka'bah. So he was able to go into creative writing, and then the tasawwuf exposition, and now philosophy of life. And this is important for a Malay Indonesian intellectual to take the lead in this part of the world, I would consider. So Buya is, I would say, among the first, if not the first, thinker in this part of the world to come up with a quite a substantial work on philosophy of life. Now, what he has done in this book is he discussed several philosophical and ethical concepts which form, as I said, the constituents of a sound philosophy of life that he would like the Indonesian people to appreciate. And Buya doesn't force people. Buya doesn't say, this is it, you have to follow this. He doesn't do that. That is not his style. And that is also not the Sufi style. Because Buya is not that kind of scholar who stresses on do this, follow this, this is halal, this is haram. He is not that kind of a thinker. He's more philosophical, more open. He goes for rational discussion without being emotional. Now, I would just like to mention that he wrote this book. Okay, before I say that, the Tasawwuf Modern was written at the behest of a Chinese Muslim who asked him to write about Bahagia. And so he wrote, to fulfill the wishes of a Chinese. In this book, he wrote not at the behest of anyone, but as a sign of his gratitude to his guru, A.R. Sultan Mansur, Abdul Rashid Sultan Mansur, who was a leading thinker and leader of the Reformist movement of Muhammadiyah in Indonesia. So Hamka was very much influenced by the teachings and by this, I would say, saintly personality of Sultan Mansur. He says about his guru that Sultan Mansur lived with spiritual wealth and affluence which were without peer. Tidak ada tandingan from this respect, because Sultan Mansur lived with financial straitened circumstances. He didn't have much money, but whatever money he had or wealth, he would immediately give it to others. So such a saintly man. So he may be poor financially, but Buya considers him very, very rich spiritually. So he says that his teacher, Sultan Mansur, had an abundance of generosity, of altruism, of egalitarianism, and piety of the highest kind. Buya kept on saying that this man lived with only two books, the Quran, and then this index to the Quran, the index to the Quran, because Sultan Mansur will always be referring to the Quran, so he needs the index from Fuad Abdul Baqi, Al-Mu'jam Al-Mufahras li Alfaz al-Quran. So Buya begins by describing first the origins of the word philosophy, and we know that philosophy or falsafa in Arabic is translated as hikmah, is a love of wisdom. Yeah, philosophy literally means a love of wisdom, and so he discussed the views of the materialists on the one hand, and then the spiritualists, and so on. Then he also discussed the approach of Muslim philosophers and theologians who did not separate reason from revelation, but in fact integrated reason and revelation, and that sound rational thinking within the framework of Iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would provide the answers to the fundamental questions raised by the philosophers. So Hamka emphasizes not only in this book, but in many of his writings, the need to balance reason with revelation, the need to integrate reason with revelation, or the intellect with the heart, or what he calls in another place, the intellect and intuition, reason and intuition. And Buya then mentions the model of the ulul albab in the Quran, and these are the people with sound reason, ashabul uqul as-salima. These are the people with sound reason. as a proof that this is the paradigm of Tawheed, which integrates both reason and revelation. Then Hamka says that after achieving independence, many Indonesian thinkers and philosophers emerged, and of course they were also describing their own understanding of how the people could achieve the goals of the new well-being, keadilan masyarakat, or social justice, and so on. But as Buya, himself as a philosopher, that's very, very modest of him, because I think he could be regarded as a philosopher in his own way, and he would be, of course, above the level of the ordinary ulama who are only well-versed with the religious sciences and not with philosophy. Hamka, in the rest of chapter 1, remember that he has 9 chapters, and this almost 500 pages, I am going to give you just the gist of it, just the gist of it, and then I will say about 10:15, I will stop, so that we'll have about 15 minutes of Q&A. All right. So in the rest of chapter 1, Hamka discusses the importance of Akhal, or intellect, or human intelligence in life. And he says that Akhal was created to serve good purposes, but because human beings are also created with desire, with hawa, with nafs, says nafsu, and the Akhal could come under the influence of nafs, under the influence of this base desire, or an-nafsul ammara bisu, which would lead human beings to the wrong paths and the wrong conduct. And Buya says that Akhal becomes darkened because of nafs. Then he discusses 15 characteristics of people of reason. It's very long. I will not bother you with that. But at the end of the 15 characteristics of people with sound Akhal, he of course refers to the statement of the Prophet ﷺ that your ibadah is measured in accordance with the extent of your Akhal in it, in the extent of the meaning of your ibadah with reason. And so you are going to be evaluated in accordance with the degree that you put your reason into your intellect and your rational understanding in whatever religious duties you perform. Then Buya says that, coming to the end of the chapter, he says, the goal of reason, tujuan akal, is ma'rifatullah. Of course, ma'rifatullah is a Sufi concept. See how he blends reason with, you might say, mysticism. Ma'rifatullah is something that has to do with Gnosticism, or the spiritual knowledge God, not his essence, but of his attributes. So, so the real purpose of Akhal is not to challenge God, is not to be worshipped as a God, is not to be the only source of knowledge. And these are the three attributes of reason in the modern world. In the modern world, reason is removed from its anchorage in revelation. So reason becomes completely autonomous and independent, and then absolutized to be the only criterion of what's right and wrong, where revelation is out of the picture. And then reason is deified. Reason is deified as God in place of the real God. So this, to my mind, is important to understand, and also to prevent the Muslim Ummah from going the wrong way, the way of modern Europe with rationalism alone. Okay. So to then for Buya, knowledge should then, or science should be guarded by Iman or faith, and this kind of life after the present life. And he says this knowledge or this science, which is guided, not just guarded, but guided by Iman, would value the life that comes after this life, that is the eternal life. Yeah, and that, to Buya, is a source of happiness. Okay, then Buya also discusses the place of Sunnatullah and how people use the term laws of nature and attribute these laws to nature, bringing about those regularities which we call natural laws. But to Buya, those are Sunnatullah, and Sunnatullah has to be understood in the proper way. And this is part of also observing the adab with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Buya addresses the importance of adab, proper etiquette with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with fellow human beings, with nature, and so on. But then he says that the adab with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires loving him and loving the Prophet above everything else. And Buya quotes the hadith from Al-Bukhari and Muslim, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكون الله ورسوله أحب إليه مما سواهما. None of you has complete faith or sound faith until Allah and His Messenger are loved more than anything else to him. So adab with Allah involves loving Allah. This is very important for us to know, yeah, for present day Muslims to know, because we are required as believers to love Allah. الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَّدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. Those who have faith have the highest degree of love of Allah. So we have to understand that this is required. And Buya then goes on to another chapter. I'm skipping some of the chapters because I think that I may not have time to give all the summary. I will try my best. In the chapter on kesederhanaan or moderation, Buya describes the various aspects of moderation. Moderation in what do you call it, in the use of reason, moderation in expressing one's feelings, moderation in the pursuit of life, and moderation in the craving for wealth, and so on. So it's a very, very long chapter. And I think this must have been written before he started working on his Tafsir al-Azhar, because this kesederhanaan, this subject of moderation, is in fact found in the Quran in the verse 143 of Surah Al-Baqarah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وكذلك جعلناكم أمة وسطا لتكونوا شهداء على الناس ويكون الرسول عليكم شهيدا. So indeed we have made you into a middle nation, so that you become witnesses unto mankind, and that the messenger will be a witness unto you. But he did not refer to this surah. He did not refer to this ayah. But his elaboration on moderation, in fact, fit in very well with any good commentary on this ummatan wasata or wasatiyya in Islam. So I would say that Buya Hamka in the Malay world could be among the first to expound the concept of kesederhanaan or moderation. And that's another first for him. I would think so, because it's very important. And he would like the Indonesian people to adopt this kesederhanaan, because basically what you find the i'tidal is avoiding of the extreme of ifrat and tafrit, of excess and liberality. You know, you are sometimes given two opposite choices, and both are extremes. So the best way, the just way, is the middle way. So ummatan wasata is the ummah in the middle, in the sense that you are the most just, the most excellent, the strongest, the best, the what have you. So he would like the Indonesian people to practice moderation, and I think this is a very important lesson for all of us today. Let me then go to, then he also talks about the need to transform the education system, the non-formal education system, the way the families bring up their children. He wants them to be infused with the values of moderation, because that without this ability to find the middle path, people can go into one extreme or the other extreme. And Buya was very concerned about that. So he would like, he says that there are children of well-to-do families who do not give sound character education to their children, and not emphasizing moderation. He said that they would become social parasites who would depend on others for their well-being or sustenance. See, Buya is very far-sighted in this, that the education on moderation will produce the kind of people that will be independent, but also avoiding extremes, and then be self-reliant rather than becoming social parasites. Then I should mention that he discussed a very important topic in today's world, that is a relationship between state and religion, or what he calls gereja dan negara, the separation of church and state. That's a political subject. And this also comes under his philosophy of life. Of course, to him, or to all Muslims, the state ought to also govern based on the input of religious values, religious norms, and principles. But Buya maintains that the state that Islam is propagating is a democratic state. Buya used the word democracy. And so Buya, and of course, Bapak Nasir is you might consider as among the first Islamic Democrats, preceding our doctor, what's his name in Algeria, who is known to be, a propagator of Islamic democracy. Anyway, so Buya is not in agreement with this separation. He would like the Indonesian state, because the majority of the people are Muslims, that the state be governed in accordance with Islamic principles. But what form of politics and what form of governance, he says this is left for the people to decide based on the shura, based on the mutual consultation. All right, then, I said that he wants the Indonesian state to be truly independent, because he says there's no point declaring yourself merdeka, independent, politically, but your mind is controlled still by the colonial system. And Buya, not in this book, but in some of his speeches, referred to al-ghazwul fikri, the intellectual battle in which the colonial masters seek to retain their dominance, although they are outside of the country, of the colony, but they still like to retain by exporting their ideas, their systems, and then also by cultivating a new crop of elites who are also spiritually, mentally colonized. Buya cautions against, even during the time of revolution. Here is self-criticism by Buya. He said there are people during the time of evolution who would actually be interested in gaining power for themselves. Whereas the struggle for independence, the revolution, was for the state, for the country, for the people, the community. But there were individuals who actually saw this revolution as an opportunity to make themselves, known and be appointed as leader, and they wanted to use the power for their own selves. In the one chapter before the conclusion, Hamka writes that Islam is a formulator of a worldview. Islam is pembentuk pandangan hidup. This is pandangan hidup. In the next lecture, Brother Shahran, in lecture number 5, inshallah, I will focus on another book. Following this book is Pandangan Hidup Muslim. That is dealing with the worldview, the Muslim worldview. This one is philosophy of life according to Islam, but he did not say according to Islam. So the philosophy of life is rather limited, but worldview is broader. But he did say in this book that Islam is a formulator of a worldview. And that then he goes on to speak about how the Sharia responsibilities and also religious obligations in Islam actually take care of both the spiritual needs as well as the material needs of mankind. But what is most important in the performance of these ibadat, like salah, zakah, fasting, sawm, siyam, and hajj, he says the most important refinement of this worship proper is love. He says if you don't have the love, then it is not complete. So because with love or mahabbah, then your devotion is complete, because Allah wants the believers to have this love. So then he says that the most important struggle is the inner self, the jihadun nafs. And when you have love of Allah, then you have to, then of course you conquer your lower desires, and your love becomes purified. So you need to undergo frequent, what he calls tazkiyah an-nafs, purification of the self. Now, in the conclusion, I'm coming to the end, Hamka reiterates that in Islamic philosophy, he says, all power is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is very important lesson, message for the politicians or those aspiring to be politicians or to be political masters, because they are going for power. And in the process, they begin with good intentions, but in the process, they get into the materialistic culture and uses power only for personal gain, or for cronies, or for your friends and for your family and for yourself. And this has happened in Malaysia in recent years. So, and Malaysia is regarded as one of the most corrupt countries in the world, if not the most corrupt country in the world, with the greatest kind of what do you call it, scandal in the 21st century. So anyway, Buya says that we have to remember that in Islamic philosophy, power is with Allah, and that all human beings are actually equal, and that one is considered noble, or the noblest among people are those who have a higher degree of taqwa or God consciousness. In akramakum indallahi atqakum. Then finally, he says that with ikhlas, we will obtain the barakah, the blessing from Allah. We will obtain also the peace and security, and also the inner tranquility, the sakina and inner peace. The end for the muttaqin, the end is paradise prepared for the muttaqin. Of course, this is all taken from the Quran, like this Jannat or Iddat lil Muttaqin, prepared for those who are God-fearing. And he says the essence of paradise, which is more valuable than paradise itself, is Ridwan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, we all want to go to paradise as the final goal. But more important than paradise is Ridwan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the pleasure of Allah. So he says, in the end, we began our struggle in life with birth. Then at the end, we face death, which transports us to the eternal life. For the life of baqa, the life of permanence, from this life of fana, of annihilation, we move on to the life of baqa. In the end, he says, goodness will prevail because we were originally created with goodness, with fitrah, with ruh from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we must put our trust in the goodly regard for God. He says in Malay, in Indonesian, bersangka baik terhadap Tuhan. And he says at the end, this is the philosophy of life. Inilah falsafah hidup. So I will end there, brothers and sisters, and Brother Shahran, I'll end there, and we'll be very happy to listen and benefit from your comments, inshallah.
Thank you so much, Prof. If I can pick up one line that Hamka or you explained, that our ibadah is measured based on our reason and intellect. So I think this is very true. It will be meaningless with just doing things without knowing
Exactly, yeah.
philosophy behind it.
Yes.
We take the first question from my brother Nurdin. Can you explain further about chapter 9 of the book Falsafah Hidup, where Hamka elaborates on Islam membentuk pandangan hidup? Does this discussion show that Hamka realizes that Islam is a distinctive worldview based on the spirit of Tawheed? Hamka also says in the conclusion that the discussion on the Falsafah Hidup is actually the essence of what is called human rights. Can you elaborate further? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Apparently you have also read the book, Brother Nuruddin. So maybe you can tell me better than myself. But I was thinking maybe when he wrote that that Islam is the formulator of the worldview, pembentuk pandangan hidup. Maybe he is preparing himself for the next book, which is Pandangan Hidup Muslim, because he did not go into very long discussion. But then he went into how the Sharia takes care of both the external and the internal needs of human beings. So let me just have a quick look at the chapter 9. Ya, Islam pembentuk pandangan hidup. Islam pembentuk pandangan hidup. Then he goes into Sharia. So I do not know whether he was, maybe not, it is not here, but when I read the next book, inshallah, for next week, I will try to look whether he realized that Islam has a distinctive worldview based on Tawheed. But I would, even if it doesn't say so, I would imagine that this is implied. But then again, let me read the book. I have started looking at some of it, but inshallah by next week, I hope I'll be able to go through the book and see whether he has made any remarks about the worldview being Islamic worldview being very distinctive. Okay, and then as for human rights, yeah, here he maybe again here because he is referring to the Indonesian, the new Indonesian state after independence. And I think of course the secular intellectuals and the secular nationalists were pointing to HAM, this universal human rights, hak asasi manusia. And Buya says, the Islamic religion allow, and the Islamic governance or governance based on Islam allows freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of life, freedom to own property, which is of course against the communist idea of collective ownership, and freedom of also dignity for women. So he finds harmony between Islam and the fundamental human rights. Of course, in today's world, this fundamental human rights have become a kind of religion with some people who regard it as the most important thing, because they're emphasizing the value of absolute freedom for human beings. And I don't think Buya would ever agree to the idea of absolute freedom. For instance, for some of those people who practice, let's say, a homosexual lifestyle, would consider is their freedom to define their body and how to use their body, and also those who wanted to marry from the same sex would say this is my human right. So human rights have become a pseudo religion. And it is also, of course, happening in Malaysia and Indonesia. But of course, at that time, human rights was something new, and Buya saw the harmony between the universal human rights and also Islamic values. Okay, that's my response to Brother Nuruddin. Maybe you have other questions?
Before that, if Dr. Aziza want to add something, we can unmute her. I sent her a message.
Oh, good.
But she is not responding. But if she wants, just let me know.
Yeah. Dr. Aziza, you are the authority on the Tasawwuf Modern.
Aziza Rahmat, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, we take from Brother Ibrahim. He also asked last week, what books of Hamka are available in English? Any translation of his work, Prof, in English? So far that we know.
Very interesting.
I know thesis, a few theses in English, but not himself.
Yeah. But I don't know if it has been translated. No, I wouldn't know. But I think maybe Dr. Said Khairuddin would know. But I don't know anything in English. Actually, I wanted Dr. Aziza to publish her book, because her thesis, because it is translation and critical annotation. So it would be the first translation of Tasawwuf Modern in English. But no, I don't think I have come across any book in English. It's very surprising. Surprising indeed.
Assalamualaikum, Prof.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
There's no English. There's no Hamka's book in English yet.
Okay. Your thesis will be the first one, inshallah. Inshallah. Yeah. You see, it's very important that people know the wisdom and the contributions of Buya Hamka. But it's only the Malay Indonesian people who would know. But in English, the whole world will know. So your work, your thesis should be publish into a book as soon as possible, Dr. Aziza.
Inshallah.
Actually, there are two giants, Nasir and Hamka. So
Yeah.
we really should have a team.
Yeah. In fact, I planned a long time ago, but I could not implement it to translate Fiqh Da'wah of Pak Nasir. I had that intention to translate Fiqh Da'wah, but I could never do it.
But
now maybe it is.
Prof, Falsafah Hidup is harder to translate.
Yeah. Of course, I know because it is philosophical.
Yeah.
Written from a philosophical style.
But Aziza, can you brief 2-3 minutes about your thesis?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, actually, I traced Hamka from the beginning, and mostly from his childhood, and how he said he was affected by the way he was brought up. So actually, Tasawwuf Modern, it was originally a 65 series of articles in Pedoman Masyarakat. So he missed 1 or 2 weeks, but actually he was trying to Hamka was trying to please. Actually, it's on happiness. Sorry, because I'm not prepared.
It's okay.
It's on happiness actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
bahagia.
So he wrote from what I discovered that he didn't write the articles. First, he said he wrote because he was responding to the situation around him and the people who were suffering. But I don't know when in his book he said that he wrote for his friend Origin King. I don't know why. But so Tasawwuf Modern is actually he is a discourse of happiness from the Sufi discourse. Actually, he wrote happiness on Sufism, based on Sufism. But actually, it's not a Sufi book per se.
Yeah,
it's not. But it's actually because he said why he chose Sufism, because the Sufis were interested to discuss happiness.
Yeah.
It's one of the Sufi discourses. So,
okay, Doctor. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Aziza.
We probably have 2-3 minutes for final remark. We still have question from Brother Nuruddin, Brother Ibrahim, but it's okay. We'll take it for next week. Okay, Prof. For tonight.
Thank you very much, Brother Shahran and brothers and sisters for following this. As I mentioned, I consider this work, Falsafah Hidup, a very, very important work in the Malay world because this is the first work on the philosophy of life written from a philosophical perspective, and as usual, Buya would discuss other philosophers and scholars, and then coming up with the references from the Quran and the Sunnah. But what I like the Malay people in the younger generation of Muslims in Malaysia and also in Indonesia is to imbibe those 7-8 constituents of philosophy, especially the kesederhanaan, adab, and then the sound reasoning, which is based on faith in God, and then but kesederhanaan there has a lot of message for people going into politics, going into governance, going into entrepreneurship, as well as civil service. So I would like them to also benefit from the advice given by Buya, because Buya has given his insights into what has happened to young people who are very ambitious to gain power, authority, status, but without proper spiritual purification of the heart. They would, they will fall into the trap of immorality, of corruption and fraud. And that is very, very pertinent to today's political chaos that we have in our country, in Malaysia particularly. So I hope, inshallah, next week I will take another book on Pandangan Hidup Muslim to discuss the contents with you. Thank you so much. May Allah bless you all, Brother Shahran, and forgive me for any shortcomings.
Thank you, Prof. We'll see you next week. Thank you, everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.